Hey guys, 16-bit Dad here, and welcome to a brand new series. This is going to be a little bit different, as you can probably tell by the fact that you're currently looking at some gameplay footage rather than the title screen or my face. But there's a reason for it. Rather than going through and actually playing the game on camera, what I wanted to do is I wanted to reimagine the way I've been looking at games for this series. I wanted to go a bit more in depth, a bit more detailed into the way we explore gameplay, storylines, everything. I really wanted to be able to critique, and analyse any particular game that is featured in this series. So, with that in mind, I figured why not start with something that is also a reimagining of the way things were done, and we'd start with Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Let's get to it, shall we? Okay, so getting started, I guess let's take a look at the storyline first, at least half the storyline, because Silent Hill Shattered Memories it's a difficult one to sit and analyse because it technically has two different storylines in a sense, even though they are heavily interconnected. So we'll take a look at the Harry storyline, the in the world, in the nightmare storyline of the main gameplay to begin with. So in that sense, the game starts off with basically the typical car crash that we all know and kind of remember from the start of the original Silent Hill game. Harry's driving his car, it crashes, he gets knocked out. When he wakes up, he finds that his daughter Cheryl is missing, and thus he starts heading off to try and find where she is and basically just reunite with his now missing daughter. Of course, things can't be that simple because this is, after all, a Silent Hill game. So things get a bit weird when he first comes along and finds, depending how the story is playing and how you're acting in the game, either he comes across a diner or a bar, where he will either be helped by Sybil Bennett, the police officer from the original game, or the manager of the establishment, basically one or the other, and they will talk to him, find out that from his ID he lives in Silent Hill, and he lives relatively nearby actually. His address is quite close. So once again, you head off. You try to get towards basically your home, and everything starts freezing over. Well, you get a phone call from your daughter who tells you to run because you can't fight, and then everything freezes, and that's when you're first introduced to the nightmare world. We'll kind of go into how the nightmare world works in kind of a bit later in this video, but basically the world freezes, monsters appear, and you have to run for your life. Eventually you get to the other side, and that's where you find your house. Except that it's not your house anymore. There's another family that's living there, and they claim that they've lived there for 14 years. So everything straight away starts getting a bit more kind of confusing, and you don't really know what's going on. Following that, trying to make sure I get everything right in my head because there's so much that happens. So at that point, Sybil Bennett arrives, and she kind of escorts you tries to escort you towards the police station because obviously something's not quite right. Your ID has a very old address on it, which apparently you haven't lived at for 14 years, even though you have no recollection of it. Could be down to a bump on the head from the car accident. No one really knows. So as you're driving along in the police car with Sybil, a blizzard happens and she kind of goes out and then doesn't come back. So Harry decides to get out of the car, just leave the police car and go off by himself. Along the way, obviously, the place freezes over again. You have to make your way through there, running away as fast as you can, until you find the local high school, where you meet a singer, I believe, who is called Michelle, and actually knows Cheryl, your daughter. However, it turns out that she says she knows Cheryl because she's a classmate, and Michelle is easily a teenager, if not kind of a young woman, which means that actually I'm pretty sure she's a young woman because it's a reunion that she was there for in the high school. So which means obviously Cheryl isn't a little girl. And as far as Harry's concerned, she's a 7-year-old little girl. But then when Michelle shows a picture on the wall in the school of the Cheryl that she knows, Harry does say there are resemblances. But it can't be the same girl because obviously Harry's daughter is a little child. So everything is getting more and more confusing. Things don't really add up. So then as you move on, they decide to look into and kind of hack into the computer database at the school, where it's revealed that actually it is the same Cheryl, and she is an adult. She has been to that high school. She's not 7 years old, and they're living at a new address. So you're very quickly starting to doubt exactly what you know, and you can tell that the game is going to be massively different already. So the connection between Harry and Cheryl is also massively different. They decide that they're going to go down to Cheryl's new address, and Michelle offers to basically give Harry a ride in her car, which is at a local kind of bar. So they head down towards the bar, go inside, and then Michelle disappears, and instead you find a young woman dressed in she'll be dressed in different types of clothing depending on how you're playing the game, but generally kind of anti-establishment, kind of punk, rock, metal, that kind of sort of clothing. And she seems to know Harry very well, claims that they are actually in a relationship, and reveals her name as Dahlia. For those of you who have played the original Silent Hill, or indeed even seen the movies, you're probably thinking, wait, what? At the moment, because obviously Dahlia in the original game is the main antagonist, and in the movies she's kind of a sub-character who's deranged. So to suddenly have her appear as this young woman who is apparently Harry's actual lover is a massive change to the storyline, and will kind of hit you right in the face and just leave you questioning everything that's going on. They then he accepts the ride because, I mean, what else can you do? He has to find his daughter. But as they're driving along, everything starts freezing over, we get into the nightmare world again, and the car crashes into the river. Harry somehow manages to escape, because he's Harry, I guess, but he does eventually kind of lose consciousness just as he gets to the shore. When he awakens, you then find that you're actually in the hospital. I can't remember the name at the moment. It's Alchemilla or something like that. And you're in a wheelchair being pushed by Sybil, who doesn't seem to be overly friendly with you. She's a little bit confused, and just as she's explaining that she's looked into his file and something's not right, she's just about to explain what it is, and then everything freezes again. So once again, you're forced to run, leaving Sybil behind as she's turned to ice. And then once you escape, you get to another familiar face from the first games, Lisa Garland, who was the nurse in the original Silent Hill. She's just had a car accident, bit of an injury to her head, so you take her home. When you get there, she asks for some pills to help her for headache, and you kind of take your leave. Not much really happens there, except that as you're walking away and trying to get on the game, you then get a phone call from Lisa asking you to hurry back. Depending on your actions in the game, when you get there, she'll either be already dead or she'll be suffering and dying in front of you. Of course, at that opportune moment, that's when Sybil comes in and tries to arrest you for murder. She also says a line that gets your head spinning even more, where she just shouts at Harry saying, "I know you're not Harry Mason." So now you're thinking, wait, what? Who am I then? Because this is obviously Harry Mason, so what is going on here? Because obviously, as someone who's played the original games, we all know who Harry Mason is. We know what he looks like. We know what he's been through. And so we came into this game expecting something similar, and now everything is completely different. The story is all over the place compared to what we're used to, and now we're being told that we're not actually Harry Mason. Obviously, before she can finish her sentence, the world freezes over again. Eventually, you make your way to Cheryl's home. Notice that I'm saying Cheryl's home. That will come into it later. And you find Dahlia again. Although this time she's older. She's not a young adult anymore. She is actually like an adult. She explains that they're married, and Cheryl is their daughter together, which is another major twist, because obviously for those of you who have played the original Silent Hill, spoiler alerts, but Cheryl is technically Dahlia's daughter, I believe. I'm trying to remember exactly, it's been a while. At least in the movie it's that way. I can't remember the game, it's been so long since I played the original. I'll have to look back into it. But anyway, now obviously it's Harry and Dahlia's daughter. So that's a big change to everything, because obviously Dahlia was the main antagonist. And then she tells Harry that Cheryl is at the lighthouse, and that's where you head off to next. You then get a ride with Michelle. Finally, she comes along with her car with her boyfriend, who partway through they have a big argument, kind of leave each other and leave you alone in the car. So rather than kind of sit and watch the rest of the argument, you just get up and go. You'll eventually find your way into another bar, I think, or yeah, it's a bar, where Michelle will talk to you and tell you that her boyfriend has broken up with her, or she's broken up with her boyfriend, again depending on how things are going in the game, and then give you a hint of a boat that will take you to the lighthouse. So you head down, you get on the boat, and inside the boat you find the young Dahlia again. So again, more and more confused. Nothing's quite. You know at this point something's really, really wrong. You don't know what's really going on, or why everything keeps chopping and changing and switching around all the time. But either way, you get on the boat with Dahlia, you start heading off, and then they decide to have some intimate time together while they're on the boat ride. Harry falls asleep afterwards, just like a typical man. And then when he wakes up, finds that Dahlia is now frozen again, but also the old Dahlia, not the young Dahlia. So she's kind of aged considerably during one small bout of sleep. You then make your way out onto the ice of the lake, because obviously when it's frozen the boat's not going to go anywhere, and you start running towards the lake house with a lot of monsters trying to run and grab onto you and hold you back and pull you down and not let you get to the lighthouse. Once you get there, there's a lot of little kind of telling objects around the place, which we'll get into in a bit, and then you get to the final door, and when you open it the ending starts, which we will cover in a minute. Before then, we've got another side of the story to look into, and that's the present, if you consider that Harry's journey is the past. Okay, so the present storyline, we'll jump right back to the beginning of the game. It opens with Dr. Kaufman, who you may also remember as one of the kind of antagonistic characters from the original Silent Hill, actually working as a psychotherapist, and the player coming to them for a session. You sit down and they start talking to you about things. They start giving you loads of different psychology tests and questions and quizzes and things to kind of develop what it is, like what your personality, what your psychological profile is. From there, that actually directly affects what happens in the past. So, for example, if you answer that you've never cheated on your family, then the game will change the way that the past looks and how it plays out, changing the way the characters are, because you're a nicer person. They're both very, very intertwined. You don't realise that this is happening because when you're playing it, but it is. As things go on, you start getting more and more questions asked, and it doesn't really seem to be going anywhere. You don't really seem to be figuring anything out about what you are. You don't really know why the session's happening. That is, until at the end of the game, when Harry is at the lighthouse and he goes through that final door. The game then switches back to the the appointment with Kaufman, and he's very angry. He's explaining how nothing seems to be working, how you can't seem to understand what's really happened, and he talks about a little girl who is clinging on to the death of the memory of her father and kind of repressing his death, and suddenly everything starts making sense. At that moment, Harry walks through the door into the appointment, and it's revealed that Cheryl is alive, well, now a woman, not a 7-year-old girl, and has been brought to a psychotherapist to try and deal with the fantasy of her father that she's created. Suddenly everything that's been happening makes sense because none of it is real. Nothing that's actually happened is at all real. It's all a fabrication of Cheryl's mind. The reason why things change in the game is because Cheryl, through Cheryl, have been putting the way you view things and the way your psychological makeup is into those memories that you were playing through as Harry. Those shattered, distorted memories. It's probably one of the best titles, like the most relevant titles ever, I have to say. So from there, the ending kind of depends on whether or not Cheryl can accept that her dad is actually gone, or whether the therapy sessions didn't really help. That's basically how the story of Silent Hill Shattered Memories is. It's a work of genius, if I'm honest. I think it's amazing. It's a very simple plot twist at the end when you look back at it, but it works so well. So, with that out of the way, let's take a look and sit back and talk about the gameplay instead. Okay, so the gameplay of Silent Hill Shattered Memories is split into 3 different kind of structures, I guess. The least prevalent one is the psychotherapy analysis, where every now and then the game will just pull you back into that session and have you answer various different questions and quizzes and carry out little arranging the pictures, that kind of thing. Pretty simple to do, but quite enjoyable actually. And as I said, it does have a direct effect on the rest of the actual game. In the effect it has on the second least prevalent part of the game, which is the frozen nightmare world, is that the actual monsters that will be chasing you will aesthetically change. So for example, if you're more driven by sexuality, they will start to mould themselves into more phallic imagery, things like that. So while there is only one type of enemy, they physically and aesthetically they do change to suit your mental setup, I guess, for lack of a better word, your psychic profile, that thing. Anyway, the other thing that can change is in the most prevalent side of things, which is the exploration side, but where you're playing through Harry but you're not in a nightmare stage. who are just walking around the relatively deserted Silent Hill. So character aesthetics can change. So take Sybil for example. She can either have a very kind of strict uniform, a laid-back uniform, or a sexy uniform. Their attitudes and the way they hold themselves and interact with Harry changes. Again, staying with Sybil, she can either be very, very stern, strict, to the point police officer, calm, friendly, polite, welcoming, or just outright sexualized. Every character has different kind of versions of themselves. And then on top of that, it can also... So for example, one of the things that you have to do at one point is colour in your home. And then the colours that you use on that picture in the therapy session become the actual colours of the house in the Harry section. So everything is all intertwined. But it goes a bit deeper than that as well, because the Harry section also then kind of reports back to the psychotherapy session, which then reports back again to the Harry section in a nice little kind of circle. So for example, if when you're running around you spend more time looking at alcohol bottles, or you kind of just notice all the alcohol bottles with your flashlight, or you spend time looking at half-naked posters, things like this that are scattered around, that will change your psycho profile. So you've got alcohol, sexual, family, I think there's another one, but I can't remember. But yeah, I think there's 4 different scores that kind of build up over time. As these build up, your psychological profile is kind of altered and changed based on how you're actually acting. So it also kind of that was the other one. It was your lie scale, because while you can lie in the kind of the sections where you're talking with Kaufman, the game will know exactly how you are or how you're acting with the game itself, and that if it kind of goes against what you're saying, then it builds up your lie score as well. So all of that then adds up and then changes the game as well. So not only do your answers in the Kaufman section change the Harry section, but your actions in the Harry section will also change the Harry section. They also change the endings that you get. Because in the title screen, which is probably one of the coolest title screens ever, you basically have a VHS that, as you go through each menu section, kind of plays through the next part of the VHS, which is Harry and Cheryl going to an amusement park and just having a fun day out, taking photos and enjoying themselves. But that's not the whole video. The rest of it is played after the section where either Cheryl has to accept her father's death, or kind of just choose to live a fantasy forever. At that point you get an extra part of the video at the end of it. That changes depending on your psychological profile. So you can either have, I think that the different names are Love Lost, which is where Harry is packing because the marriage with Dahlia has broken down, and he comes over to Cheryl and tells her that while they don't love each other anymore, they both still love Cheryl. Then you've got the drunk dad ending, where Cheryl finds Harry on a porch. He yells at her in typical drunken dad fashion, demands another beer, and then says that he's like this because of his family. And you've also got Sleaze and Sirens, which is where you find out that Harry was cheating on Dahlia with, funny enough, Lisa and Michelle. And then the final one is Wicked and Weak, where you learn that Harry was a very weak man who was abused by Dahlia, physically abused by Dahlia, and then when he notices that Cheryl is watching, he doesn't say anything, he just meekly looks away. So depending on how you are in the game creates this final kind of real version of Harry that we see at the end. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of plus points of Silent Hill Shattered Memories. A lot of people took away from it that, okay, it's so different from the original game, I don't really like it, and it comes up with the whole thing that Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Twin Snakes had, which is where you get people saying you're not a true fan if you like this version of the game. But the problem is, it's not a remake of the game, it's a reimagining. It's an entirely different story, and it's not actually Harry's story to begin with, it's Cheryl's story. And the fact that, from a gameplay perspective, it does all of this, and it does it so well. I mean, it's not massive, kind of groundbreaking, world-ending changes to the game, but it does still change the game based on you. I think that's really impressive. So the fact that the story is so confusing and so strange, but with such a great twist at the end as well, and the fact that the story will change depending on you, I think it's a brilliant thing. I think from a critical point of view, I can't really fault it. I've got to say, it's so well put together. I think the only real faults I've ever come across with the game, there's two. One is that on the Wii version, which is the original version, I'm not sure about the PS2 and PSP version, but at least on the Wii version, there is a sort of jolt as you go through doors into new sections, because I'm assuming it's loading the new section. It's a bit jarring when you open the door and the game just jolts a bit, but I guess technical limitations and all that, you can't really expect much else. And then the other part is the actual running kind of nightmare scenes. You can't fight. That's one of them. That's actually a really big positive for me. I love the fact that you can't defend yourself. I think it adds a lot more. It can add a lot more stress to a game, such as, for example, Amnesia. They did it brilliantly as well. The problem with Shattered Memories in that sense is that really all you have to do is hold forward, run, and just you'll get there eventually. It can get stressful when you get lost in the nightmare sections, but as long as you keep running, you're generally going to be okay. You can hide, but there's no point because they'll find you. Just keep running. So I think the problem is that people coming into Silent Hill Shattered Memories expecting a survival horror game, and it's not. It's a thriller. It's not a horror at all, because it's not scary. It's exciting. It's adrenaline pumping, but it's not horror. It's a psychological thriller, and if you look at it that way and take away from the survival horror aspect and just look at it as a psychological thriller, it's an absolutely outstanding game. It did really well critically, but fans were very torn. Many of them just downright hate it because of it ruining I am doing the quotation marks here, ruining the original game, when it's not at all, because it's not actually the original game in the slightest. It's an entirely different retelling of. It's an entirely new story with similar characters, because they're not even the same characters; they're just the same names. So, if you haven't played it, critically, it's a brilliant. Like from a critique point of view, it's a brilliant game. It's very different from other Silent Hills. Doesn't feel like a normal Silent Hill in the slightest. It feels like an entirely different game, but it works so well, and I think the developers have done such a great job on it. It's, to this day, my favourite Silent Hill game actually released, and I know a lot of people are going to get very angry at me for saying that, but I'm going to be honest. I think what they've done is brilliant. The storyline is confusing, it's weird, it makes you question everything. You can understand that there's something wrong as you go through the game. You know that Harry's not right, something's wrong with him. He's not a reliable voice. He's not a reliable viewpoint for you to go and play the game through. And then at the end you find out that that's because he doesn't actually exist and it's all a figment of Cheryl's creation. And that is a great little twist at the end. It's a wonderful game. It's done really well. And I think that's really all I have to say for it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm going to be doing one, as I say, every 2 weeks, bi-weekly now, kind of just really dissecting the storyline and the gameplay. I'm not even going to talk about graphics, because I don't care really about them, but analysing the storyline and the gameplay of a game randomly chosen every 2 weeks. And yeah, if you did like and enjoy this, then a like, share and subscribe would be really appreciated. And don't forget to check out my Patreon, where you can obviously support the channel but also get your say in what we play on the weekly retro series. And if you haven't checked that out, I will link it in the description as well. thanks for watching. Have a great day.